Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we are wading into some incredibly deep waters. And when I say deep, I mean, I don't just mean complex.
Right.
I mean, we're going right down to the bottom of the ocean of Christian thought.
To the bedrock.
Exactly. To the very bedrock of what this faith has historically claimed to be. We're tackling a topic that is arguably the engine room of Christian theology, but one that, well, our source material today argues has been slowly and quietly shut down in a lot of modern churches.
It is a fascinating and honestly somewhat stark observation to start with.
Yeah.
We're looking at a collection of theological essays, some cultural critiques, all centering on a theme the authors call the theological anemia of the bloodless gospel.
The theological anemia of the bloodless gospel.
Right off the bat, that title tells you exactly where this is going.
It's not pulling any punches at all.
No, it is not.
Yeah.
It's suggesting that without this specific element, the whole system is weak. It's anemic.
It's failing. And the central hook here, the thing that really grabs you when you read this, is this observation about the Western church specifically.
Yes.
The cross is still everywhere.
Everywhere you look.
Right, it's on the steeples,
It's on necklaces.
church logos, T-shirts, you name it.
Massive aesthetic symbol.
Right, you see it in high fashion, you see it in modern art.
Mhm.
But the blood, and by that the source means the specific theology of why Jesus had to die.
That has been drained out of it.
Completely drained out.
Exactly. The source is basically arguing that we are living through this massive crisis where the cross remains popular, but mostly just as a symbol.
Like a symbol of inclusion, maybe?
Inclusion or just sacrifice in a general sense.
Or just love.
Right, just love. But the specific theology of the blood, that is becoming deeply offensive to modern sensibilities.
It's getting marginalized.
Pushed right to the edges. And the authors are very clear here. They aren't just talking about, a change in musical tastes.
Or like a stylistic preference for how a church looks.
Yeah. No, they are calling this a cosmological and anthropological paradigm shift.
Which is a very academic way of saying our entire view of the universe has changed.
Yes.
And our view of what it means to be a human being has changed.
Yeah.
And the church is just scrambling to catch up to that.
Precisely. It is a shift in how we view reality itself. And because of that massive shift, modern believers are getting increasingly uncomfortable with concepts that, well, they used to be completely non-negotiable.
The foundation.
The absolute foundations. Things like wrath, judgment, and the big one, penal substitution.
Penal substitution.
Yeah.
Right. That is the heavy hitter we're going to have to unpack for you today.
Yes, we are.
Because it sounds intense.
Oh, it does.
Because frankly, it is intense. It sounds incredibly legal.
It sounds harsh.
Very harsh.
And yet, historically speaking, it was actually the source of the absolute greatest comfort for believers.
Which is the paradox here.
Right. The fact that it has moved from being this ultimate source of comfort to a source of embarrassment, that is the core tension we are exploring in this deep dive.
So just to lay out the roadmap for you listening, this is really a journey through history, sociology, and theology.
I'm good at everything.
Yeah. We're going to look at how we moved from an age of guilt to an age of therapy.
Huge.
Massive. Then we'll look at the controversial rebranding of God's justice, how people started calling it violence.
The cosmic child abuse argument.
Right, exactly. Then we're going to take a trip back to the 17th century.
Which is where things get really interesting.
Because surprisingly, the source argues that the logic we desperately need today is actually hiding back there.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, with the Reformed scholastics. We are going to blow the dust off some really old books.
Absolutely.
And finally, and I think this is where it's going to get really surprising for you, we're going to connect all of this 17th century theological theory to something very modern.
Cancel culture.
Cancel culture. Who would have thought?
That connection is vital, really, because it shows that we haven't actually escaped the need for atonement in our modern society.
We've just relocated it.
Exactly.
But let's start right at the beginning. The source talks about a sociological diagnosis.
Yes.
Why are we suddenly so uncomfortable with blood? Why does the idea of a sacrifice make modern people squirm in their seats?
To understand that, the source points us to a sociologist, a guy named Philip Rieff.
Okay.
He wrote this really prophetic book back in 1966. It was called The Triumph of the Therapeutic.
The Triumph of the Therapeutic.
Right. Now, what's crucial here is that Rieff wasn't a theologian.
He wasn't religious.
No, he was a secular sociologist. But he diagnosed this monumental shift in Western civilization. He called it the transition from religious man to psychological man.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. Who exactly was religious man? Because I'm assuming we aren't just talking about, like, people who go to church every Sunday or monks living in a monastery.
Oh, no, not at all. It's a cultural archetype. It describes basically the default setting of the human mind for most of recorded history.
The operating system.
The operating system, perfectly said. Religious man, which dominated the West for centuries and centuries, lived in a culture that was bound together by a shared system of moral demands.
Right.
There was this higher, holy standard, a vertical standard, if you will.
Something outside of the self.
Completely outside the self.
So almost like a blueprint that you had to build your entire life against. A standard that existed whether you liked it or not.
Exactly. The standard was objective. It was out there. God, or the moral law, or whatever the culture defined it as, demanded certain things.
Like purity.
Purity, honesty, fidelity.
Yeah.
And the whole goal of life was to conform to that standard.
You look upward.
You look upward and you try to align your messy life with that vertical reality.
Right. And when you fail to meet that blueprint, which, let's be honest, everyone inevitably did.
Because nobody's perfect.
Exactly. What was the result of that failure?
The ruling emotion of that era was guilt.
Guilt.
And this is so important to grasp. It was objective guilt.
Objective meaning.
Meaning, you broke the law, therefore you are guilty. It wasn't about how you felt about the crime.
Oh, I see.
It was about the fact of the crime itself. Think of it like a traffic ticket. If you run a red light, you are guilty of a traffic violation, regardless of whether you feel happy, sad, or indifferent about running it.
You can't just tell the cop, well, my truth is that the light was green.
Right. The cop doesn't care about your truth. The objective standard was violated.
So in that specific world, the religious man's world, sin is essentially a legal problem.
It is a legal problem.
It's a crime against a holy order. It's a very real debt that you owe to the system you just broke.
Right. And because it's a legal problem, it requires a transaction to fix it.
A pardon.
A pardon, a payment, something objective to balance the scales. But then, and this is the shift Reef identified, then comes psychological man.
The triumph of the therapeutic.
Yes. In our modern therapeutic age, that vertical standard, that objective blueprint we talked about, it has completely collapsed.
It's gone.
There is no up there anymore. There is only in here.
So the ceiling has effectively been lowered.
The ceiling is completely gone. The goal of human existence is no longer conforming to a divine standard. Now, the goal is psychological well-being.
Self-actualization.
Self-actualization, emotional equilibrium, living your best life.
Right.
The question you wake up asking isn't, am I right with God? The question is, am I happy?
Am I true to myself?
Do I feel whole? Exactly.
So if the ultimate goal of life is just feeling good about myself and being authentic to whoever I am today, then what happens to the concept of sin?
It has to change.
Because sin feels like a massive downer in that context.
It's a buzzkill.
Yeah, it feels like an attack on my self-esteem. If I have to walk into a building once a week and be told I'm a sinner, that doesn't fit the therapeutic model at all.
It doesn't. So the concept of sin gets completely redefined, and this is really the crux of the first part of our source material.
Okay.
In a therapeutic culture, sin is no longer a violation of God's law. Instead, it gets interpreted as brokenness.
It's trauma.
It's trauma, it's dysfunction.
I mean, you hear that language absolutely everywhere now.
Everywhere.
I'm broken, I have these wounds, I'm just struggling. It's incredibly common in church circles today.
It is.
And honestly, it sounds a lot softer.
It is much softer. And the source is very careful here, and we should be too. It acknowledges that trauma is incredibly real.
Right. It's not dismissing psychology.
Not at all. In fact, it cites Gabor Mate, who is a renowned expert in this field, and he defines trauma as a disconnection from the self.
Which is a valid psychological category.
Completely valid. We get hurt by others, we have terrible childhood wounds, we have chemical imbalances. That is all undeniably true.
But the source has a major problem with how the modern church is using that truth.
Yes. The source argues that the church has basically co-opted this psychological language to replace the biblical category of sin.
To swap them out.
Exactly. So the person sitting in the pew is no longer viewed as a rebel who needs a judge. They are now viewed as a victim who needs a therapist.
Wow. That is a massive shift in how we view humanity.
It changes everything.
Because if I am primarily a victim, I don't need forgiveness, do I?
No, you don't.
I need healing. I need a hug, not a legal pardon.
Right. Think about the medical difference here. If you are sick, you need a physician.
You need medicine.
Right. If you are traumatized, you need empathy, you need solidarity, you need time to process and heal.
Yeah.
But you definitely do not need a substitute to die a bloody, horrific death for you.
No.
You don't need someone to step in and pay a penalty because you didn't commit a crime, you just suffered an injury.
So if the root problem is just a sickness or a brokenness, then the cross, the actual physical blood sacrifice of Jesus, it starts to look really confusing.
It looks bizarre.
Right. Like, why did Jesus have to die this incredibly violent death just to help me heal from my emotional trauma?
Right.
Couldn't he just, I don't know, come down and run a really, really good support group?
Exactly. If the diagnosis of the human condition is wrong, the cure is going to look completely absurd.
Oh, that's good.
It's like, imagine you go to the doctor with a broken leg. The bone is sticking out.
Okay, ouch.
And the doctor looks at it and says, don't worry, I'm going to go down to the courthouse right now and pay your outstanding parking tickets.
You'd look at him like he was out of his mind.
You'd say, that doesn't help me at all. My leg is broken.
Right.
The source argues that because we have culturally diagnosed ourselves as merely broken rather than legally guilty, the cross, which historically solves the problem of objective guilt, it just no longer makes any sense to us.
That makes so much sense. And this connects directly to the two different views of the atonement that the source highlights next.
Yes.
We have what they call the therapeutic choice versus the classical choice.
Right.
And it really seems like we're just drifting backward into a very old historical debate.
We absolutely are. History implies circles. There's nothing new under the sun. On the therapeutic side, the source points us back to Peter Abelard.
Okay, Abelard.
He was a 12th century theologian. And oddly enough, he is having a huge comeback moment right now, especially in more progressive Christian circles.
Interesting. What was his big idea?
Abelard looked at the cross and proposed what is known as the moral influence theory.
Moral influence. Okay, that sounds really nice, actually. What does it actually mean in practice?
Basically, the core idea is that the cross is just a supreme demonstration of God's love.
Okay.
God didn't technically need a blood payment to forgive us. He isn't some cosmic judge up there demanding a pound of flesh for our mistakes.
He didn't have to punish anyone.
Right. Instead, he allowed Jesus to die simply to show us the extent of his love. The goal of the cross for Abelard was to inspire us, to melt our hard, stubborn hearts so that we would see that love, stop sinning, and naturally turn back to him.
So it's essentially a gesture.
Yes.
A grand, albeit tragic gesture of cosmic solidarity, like God spreading his arms and saying, look, I love you this much.
Exactly. And the source points out that this particular view fits the modern mind perfectly. Oh, totally.
It's essentially nonviolent. At least on God's part, he didn't demand the violence, he just utilized it.
Right.
It's purely about love. And most importantly for psychological man, it's about influencing our emotions. It's entirely about how looking at the cross makes us feel.
But then you have the classical view.
A heavy one?
The heavy one.
Yeah.
Championed in the modern era by theologians like John Stott, whom the source brings up. This is penal substitution.
Yes.
And Stott has a very specific beef with Abelard's view, right? He thinks the moral influence theory is missing something fundamentally critical.
He does. And what's interesting is that Stott makes a purely logical argument here, not just an emotional preference.
Okay, what's the logic?
Stott argues that the cross is only a demonstration of love if it is simultaneously a satisfaction of justice.
I'm going to need you to unpack that.
Huh?
How can it be love only if it's justice? That sounds contradictory to the modern ear.
It does. But think about it this way. This is the classic analogy that Stott uses, and it's brilliant.
Lay it on me. Imagine you are walking by a really fast, rushing river. You slip on the bank, you fall in, and you are drowning.
Okay, terrifying, but I'm with you.
You are going under. You're swallowing water. I happen to see you drowning. So I immediately jump into that rushing river. I fight the terrible current. I manage to grab you. I push you safely to the shore. But in the process, the current catches me, pulls me under, and I drown.
Wow, okay.
I die saving you.
That is the ultimate act of love. I mean, you literally gave your life for mine.
Correct. No one would dispute that's love, but now let's completely change the scenario.
Okay.
You are sitting perfectly safely on the riverbank. You're having a nice picnic on a sunny day.
Eating a sandwich.
Eating a sandwich. You are in absolutely no danger whatsoever. I am walking by on a high bridge above you. I look down. I see you eating your sandwich. I shout at the top of my lungs, I love you. And I throw myself off the bridge into the treacherous water, and I drown.
I mean, that's not love. That's madness.
Exactly.
That's just completely pointless.
It is madness. And why is it madness? Because there was no objective need for it.
There was no danger.
There was no danger I was saving you from. Stott applies this exact logic to the cross. He argues that without the absolute necessity of paying a penalty for sin,
Without the legal debt.
right, without the blood element being a strict requirement of divine justice, the death of Jesus just becomes the crazy guy jumping off the bridge for no reason.
That is such a powerful point. If there is no actual debt for me to pay, if there is no legal objective wrath coming for me, then Jesus dying is just a sad tragedy.
It's senseless violence.
It's not a rescue at all.
Right. Stott argues that for the cross to actually be a demonstration of love, it has to first be a real solution to a real problem that we couldn't solve ourselves.
Which goes back to the diagnosis.
Exactly. If the problem is just, I need to feel loved, well, God is omnipotent. He could have just sent a really nice Hallmark card. He could have just spoken a feeling of love into our hearts. He did not need to send his only son to be brutally crushed by the Romans.
Yeah.
But if the problem is, I have committed a capital crime against the holy creator of the universe, and that crime demands perfect justice, then Jesus stepping in to take that specific blow, that is profound love.
Because it actually solves the problem.
Because it satisfies the justice that I rightly deserved.
So the source is basically saying the modern church vastly prefers Abelard because it perfectly fits our therapeutic age.
We love Abelard right now.
We want the empathy. We want the guy on the bridge shouting, "I love you." But we absolutely do not want to admit that we are actually drowning in an objective guilt that makes the violent payment necessary.
We want the cure without the diagnosis. We want the solution without having to admit the problem.
Wow.
And that reality leads us directly into the second major hurdle that the source identifies.
Right, because it's not just that we mildly prefer therapy over guilt.
No, it's much stronger than that.
It's that we have come to view the alternative. We view divine justice itself as morally repugnant. We have effectively rebranded justice as violence. And this brings us to part 2 of our outline for today. The cosmic child abuse argument.
Yeah, that phrase.
I've heard this phrase used before. You see it a lot in theological debates online or in forums. It is undeniably shocking language.
It is entirely designed to be shocking. It was popularized by figures like Steve Chalk and Alan Mann back in the early 2000s.
Okay.
And their argument essentially goes like this. If God the Father requires the violent, bloody death of his own innocent son in order to be able to forgive people, doesn't that just make God a vengeful deity taking out his anger on a whipping boy?
Right.
Chalk famously wrote that it makes God look like a loveless, sadistic monster.
And honestly, you can totally see why that specific framing resonates with modern people.
Yeah.
If you look at it through a purely human lens.
Which we naturally do.
Yeah. A human father punishing his son for something the son didn't even do. That sounds horrific. If a human father did that today, we wouldn't call it holy. We'd call Child Protective Services. We'd call the police.
It sounds barbaric. And the source also brings in feminist theology here, mentioning Dolores Williams.
What was her critique?
She heavily critiqued the traditional imagery of, as she put it, folks hanging on crosses and blood dripping.
Because it's so visceral.
It's incredibly visceral. And it is deeply offensive to our modern sensibilities. Let's be honest. Modern Westerners don't like blood. We sanitize everything. We buy our meat in plastic wrap.
We don't want to see the slaughterhouse.
No, we don't like blood, and we certainly don't like the idea of divine retribution.
But the source, the authors of these essays, they push back on this critique pretty hard, don't they?
Very hard. They argue that this entire critique, calling it cosmic child abuse or a sadistic monster, it is based on a fundamental category error.
A category error.
Yes. It is based on a complete misunderstanding of what the term divine wrath actually means.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because I'll be honest, when I hear the word wrath, I immediately think of a guy just losing his temper.
Red in the face.
Yeah. I think of domestic abuse. I think of a crazy ancient king flying off the handle and ordering executions because someone spilled wine on his favorite rug.
And that is exactly what the source says we do. We project our own broken human emotions onto God.
We anthropomorphize him.
Precisely. We think of wrath as emotional instability. God having a really bad day, God throwing a cosmic temper tantrum.
Right.
But the classical, historical, theological definition of wrath is something completely different.
How so? What is the classical definition?
The source defines divine wrath as God's settled, objective, and unwavering opposition to sin.
Settled and objective.
It's not a mood swing. It doesn't fluctuate based on what he had for breakfast. It flows directly from his perfect holiness.
Okay, walk me through that connection.
Think about it this way. If God is perfectly good, He absolutely must be opposed to evil.
Oh, yeah. That makes total sense. You can't truly love what is good if you don't simultaneously hate what is evil.
Exactly. He cannot look at things like cancer or sex trafficking or genocide or child abuse and just shrug and say, I'm cool with that, whatever.
Right. A good God has to hate those things.
His opposition to those things, his unyielding determination to completely destroy evil, that is what theology calls his wrath.
Okay, so it's less like a parent screaming angrily at a child and more like
Like an immune system.
an immune system reacting to a deadly virus.
That is a fantastic analogy.
Yeah.
Your white blood cells aren't, quote unquote, mad at the virus in some emotional temper tantrum sense.
Right, they don't have feelings.
But they're aggressively, ruthlessly dedicated to destroying that virus.
Because the virus is anti-life.
Because the virus is anti-life. God's wrath is his divine immune reaction to the virus of sin, because sin is anti-life.
Wow.
He literally cannot be holy and not have wrath towards sin. If he somehow stopped having wrath towards sin, he would cease to be good.
That reframes the entire concept of wrath. But the source brings up another alternative that modern theology has tried to offer, right? To get around this whole violence thing.
Yes, and this part gets a little deep, but stay with me here. It involves a very famous theologian named Jürgen Moltmann.
Moltmann, I remember seeing that name in the text. He wrote a book called The Crucified God.
Yes. Moltmann is an absolute giant in 20th century theology, and he tried to solve this perceived problem of divine violence by arguing that God actually suffers.
Okay.
He argued for a concept called divine passibility.
Passibility meaning the ability to feel pain.
Exactly. Historically, the church taught impassibility, that God cannot be acted upon or suffer emotionally like we do. But Moltmann flipped that. He suggested that on the cross, the Father actually abandoned the Son.
So a real literal separation.
Yes, that there was a literal rupture within the Trinity itself. He said the Father suffered the immense grief of the loss of sonship, and the Son suffered the terror and loss of fatherhood.
So it turns the atonement into this shared mutual trauma within the Godhead.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to be honest, that sounds really intense. But at the same time, doesn't that sound like a good thing? I mean, God's suffering right alongside us.
It sounds incredibly empathetic.
It sounds like he truly understands my pain because he felt it too. It seems to fit our therapeutic model perfectly. God becomes the ultimate trauma victim. He's not the stern judge anymore. He's the fellow sufferer on the couch next to us.
It is very appealing to the modern ear, but the source pushes back incredibly hard on Moltmann's idea here.
Why? What's the danger?
They argue that this view effectively breaks the Trinity.
Breaks it how?
If the Father and the Son are actually torn apart, if they rupture, you lose the fundamental unity of God. You essentially have two gods fighting, or at least abandoning each other in the dark.
Oh, I see.
And the source goes even further. They say this view is actually more abusive than the classic penal substitution view.
Wait, how could God suffering with us be more abusive?
Because think about the mechanics of it. If you remove the legal framework, the covenant where Jesus willingly agrees to be the legal substitute to satisfy a legal debt, and you replace it with just the Father abandoning the Son to mindless suffering,
Then what is it?
the source argues you just turn God into an annihilator of a helpless victim.
Wow.
It becomes this internal, meaningless psychological trauma for God, rather than a legal, purposeful satisfaction of justice.
The source calls it a deadly dialectic, right?
Yes, a deadly dialectic, because it turns the cross into a senseless tragedy that God just inflicts on himself, rather than a triumphant legal victory over sin and death.
So let's recap where we are. We've got the therapeutic model, Abelard, which basically just ignores objective guilt altogether.
Right.
We've got the cosmic child abuse critique, which completely misunderstands what divine wrath actually is.
Yeah.
And we've got the Moltmann model, which internalizes the trauma right into God himself and breaks the Trinity.
It really feels like we're just running out of options here.
It does. It feels like every modern attempt to fix the problem just creates a worse problem.
And that's exactly what the source is arguing. They are saying all of these modern workarounds are total dead ends.
So where do we go?
To find the actual logic of the blood, to understand why it was logically fundamentally necessary, the source says we have to go back in time.
We have to go back to the guys who thought about this deeper than probably anyone else in history.
The heavy hitters.
The heavy hitters of the 17th century. The Reformed scholastics.
Yes.
Now, I love that we are calling 17th century theologians heavy hitters. We're talking about guys named Francis Turretin, John Owen, and Petrus van Maastricht.
Not exactly household names today.
No, you don't see them trending on Twitter. But the source suggests that these specific guys actually hold the key to our modern confusion. Why them?
Well, the reason they are so incredibly important for this conversation is that they actually faced a very similar theological heresy in their own day.
Really? History repeating itself.
Always. It was a movement called Socinianism.
Socinianism.
Right. The Socinians were essentially the 17th century version of modern progressives. And they made the exact same claim. God doesn't need blood to forgive.
It's the same argument.
Same argument. They ask, look, if God is truly loving and all-powerful, why can't he just look down and say, I forgive you?
Which is a fair question.
It is. So these scholastics, they couldn't just rely on tradition. They had to sit down and rigorously work out the actual mechanics of why God couldn't just say that. They had to, as you might say, pop the hood of the moral universe and show how the engine works.
Okay, let's pop the hood. Let's start with Francis Turretin.
Good place to start.
He asked that pretty basic question you just mentioned. Could God have just decided to forgive sin without requiring a sacrifice? Like, let's bring it down to a human level. If I owe you $10...
Okay, you can just look at me and say, hey, don't worry about it. I don't have to pay you, and you don't make anyone else pay you on my behalf. You just graciously eat the loss.
Right.
Why can't God just do that with sin? That is the central million-dollar question. If God is absolutely sovereign over everything, why can't he just wave a magic wand and forgive?
Exactly. What is Turretin's answer?
Turretin's answer is brilliant in its clarity. He makes a crucial distinction between God acting as a private party and God acting as a public official.
Okay.
He says God is not just a private creditor, he is the judge and the governor of the entire universe.
Distinguish those two roles for me. Why does that specific title matter so much?
Because a private creditor has the absolute right to forgive a private debt. Like you said, it's their money. If you owe me $10, I can choose to be generous and just let it go.
Right, because me not paying you doesn't hurt anyone else. It just affects you and me.
Exactly. But a judge in a courtroom cannot just arbitrarily forgive a crime.
Oh, I see where this is going. If a human judge has a convicted murderer standing in front of him in court,
Yes.
and the judge just bangs the gavel and says, you know what? I'm feeling really generous today. You seem like a pretty nice guy. I forgive you. Go free.
What would we say about that judge?
We would say the judge is completely corrupt. He needs to be removed from the bench immediately.
Right. He is unjust. He has failed to uphold the law, and he has failed to protect society from a dangerous person.
Because justice isn't just about his personal feelings toward the criminal.
Exactly. Turretin argues that God, as the ultimate governor of the universe, has a fundamental obligation to uphold the moral order of reality. If God just lets sin go unpunished, he is effectively saying that the law doesn't matter.
And he's saying that the victims of that sin don't matter.
Spot on. So Turretin concludes that justice isn't just something God does. It's not a hat he wears sometimes. It is who he is.
It's his nature.
He calls it essential justice. God cannot simply deny his own justice any more than he can suddenly cease to exist.
To leave sin unpunished would literally be a violation of his own nature.
It would be an admission that sin doesn't actually matter. So, you see, divine forgiveness isn't just about God being nice or empathetic. It's about God solving an impossible legal problem.
The problem of how can he be a just judge and yet still justify the guilty criminal?
How can he let the guilty criminal go free without becoming a corrupt judge himself?
And the only answer to that impossible riddle?
Is the substitute.
Blood.
The blood. The penalty absolutely must be paid. The moral law of the universe must be perfectly satisfied. But, and this is the gospel, the payment is made by God himself in the person of the Son.
That is incredible. And that leads us right into the next heavy hitter, John Owen.
Owen is fantastic.
Owen brings in this really helpful distinction between the legal reality and the experiential reality. And honestly, this was the part of the source material that really clicked for me regarding that whole therapeutic age we were discussing earlier.
It is a crucial distinction. Owen recognized that the human desire, even back in the 1600s, is always to feel peace with God.
We want the feeling.
We desperately want the experience of healing. We want the warm, fuzzy, secure feeling in our hearts.
Right.
But Owen makes this unyielding point. You cannot have the true feeling of peace until the legal reality of wrath is objectively removed.
So it's an order of operations thing.
It is entirely an order of operations. You cannot put the cart before the horse.
The transaction must be forensic. It must be a legal settlement in the courtroom before it can ever be therapeutic on the couch.
Exactly. Think about it like a terrifying cancer diagnosis.
Okay.
A patient has a deadly tumor. You can bring them into a beautiful room. You can give them the strongest painkiller so they feel no pain. You can tuck them into a comfortable bed, hold their hand, and tell them all day long how much they are loved.
That's the therapeutic part.
Right. And that therapy is good. It makes them feel better in the moment. But if the surgeon doesn't go in and legally, objectively cut out that tumor, the patient is still going to die.
The tumor in this analogy is the objective guilt.
The tumor is the legal guilt before a holy God. Owen says you absolutely have to get the legal part in first. The tumor has to be removed by the cross.
And the source argues that the modern church is basically trying to skip the harsh reality of the surgical operating room and go straight to the soft therapy couch. But it doesn't work long term because the guilt is actually still there. You can't just therapy away a legal standing.
It's impossible.
That makes total sense.
Yes.
I mean, you can look at someone and tell them you're okay, you're loved all you want, but if they know deep down in their conscience that they've committed a real crime, the positive affirmation just doesn't stick.
No, it just feels like gaslighting eventually
Yeah.
because the conscience knows the debt hasn't been paid.
Wow. Okay, so then finally we have Petrus van Maastricht,
Master.
and he brings us right back to the cosmic child abuse objection we talked about in part 2.
He does. He completely dismantles it.
He reinforces that idea of divine simplicity, right? That God doesn't have parts or unpredictable mood swings. But his really key point is about the voluntary nature of the cross.
Yes. This is the ultimate rebuttal to the whole unwilling victim narrative. The terrible idea that Jesus was somehow dragged kicking and screaming to Calvary by an angry father.
Right.
Maastricht heavily emphasizes that Christ volunteered. He had the absolute sovereign right to lay down his own life.
Like Jesus said, no one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord.
Exactly. It was not a punishment inflicted on a helpless, unwilling third party. The source sums up Maastricht's view with this incredible phrase. It was the triune God satisfying himself by giving himself.
Satisfying himself by giving himself. That's a profound summary.
It changes the entire picture. It is not an angry dad beating up an innocent son. It is a God who is so perfectly holy that he must punish sin, and yet so perfectly loving that he steps down and takes that very punishment onto himself.
It unifies justice and love in a way that the therapeutic model just can't touch.
It really does. The therapeutic model essentially says God just ignores the debt. He sweeps it under the cosmic rug. The classical model says God pays the debt at infinite cost to himself.
Now let me ask you, which of those is actually more loving?
The one who bleeds to pay the debt. The one who sacrifices something real.
Exactly. So we've established the deep theology. We've gone way back into the 17th century. But the source material doesn't stay there. It moves on to what this theological shift actually looks like on a practical level in a modern church today.
The practical application.
Right. We're calling this part 4, the antiseptic church.
It's a very vivid, very accurate description.
Because ideas have consequences, right? If you change the underlying theology of the cross, you're going to inevitably change the vibe of the Sunday service.
Absolutely. The source describes this massive liturgical shift that has happened. If you just walk into many modern Western churches today, the physical architecture itself is telling you a story.
They look like shopping malls.
Shopping malls or high-end coffee shops.
Or like a stage for a TED Talk.
Exactly. Black box theaters.
And the goal there, presumably, is just to be welcoming, right? To lower the barrier to entry for the unchurched person. You don't want to freak them out with ancient gargoyles and bleeding Jesus in stained glass.
Sure, and hospitality is obviously a good thing. But the source argues that the unstated goal is often to systematically remove the sting of offense.
The sting of offense.
Because blood is messy, blood is objectively offensive. If you think about ancient temples, not just Israelite temples, but any ancient religious site, they smelled like slaughterhouses.
Yeah, they did.
There was thick smoke, there was fire, there were animals, there was literal blood splashed around. It was incredibly visceral. Every sense you had reminded you that something innocent was dying so that you could live.
It was a serious, weighty environment.
Very weighty. And modern churches.
They smell like vanilla lattes and fresh floor wax.
Exactly. We are sanitizing the religious environment to make it completely comfortable for psychological man. We want an environment that feels entirely safe, heavily controlled, and constantly affirmative.
And the music plays a really huge role here. The
Yeah.
source actually references the CCLI Top 100.
Yes.
Which is basically the Billboard chart for modern worship music.
Yes.
It tracks what churches are actually singing every Sunday.
It's a brilliant way to measure the theological temperature of the culture. And the contrast is stark. The source invites us to compare the old historical hymns with the new stuff on the CCLI list.
So look at something old like, "There is a fountain filled with blood,"
Or stricken, smitten, and afflicted.
or "Power in the blood." Those are heavy, heavy lyrics drawn from Emmanuel's veins. That is a very graphic image to sing about before you pass the offering plate.
It is incredibly graphic. But here is the genius of it. It was full of objective, robust truth. It taught human depravity. It taught the necessity of legal pardon. It taught the objective, finished work of the blood.
It forced the congregation to look outward at the incredible cost of their salvation.
Exactly. And now look at the new stuff.
The modern worship hits.
The source argues that modern worship is overwhelmingly subjective.
Subjective.
It focuses almost entirely on our emotional response to God. It uses a lot of what they call romantic language toward Jesus.
The Boyfriend Jesus songs?
Yes, lots of talk about intimacy, being held, feeling his presence, drowning in his love. It's almost entirely about my internal experience of God rather than God's objective historical work to save me.
It's all I feel, you love me, I'm wrapped in your arms. It's a very internal therapeutic focus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is psychological man singing songs about his own feelings, but here is the really tragic part.
Okay.
The source points out a devastating pastoral consequence to this shift. You might think that singing all these positive songs about feeling love makes people feel better, more secure.
Right. If I'm singing about how much God loves me for an hour every Sunday, shouldn't I feel incredibly assured of my salvation?
You would certainly think so, but the source argues it actually actively kills assurance.
Wait, really? How?
Here is the trap. If your salvation is based on a therapeutic process, if it's based on healing your brokenness or constantly feeling God's presence, how do you ever know when you are actually done?
Oh, wow.
How do you know if you feel it enough?
If it's completely based on my feelings and my feelings are, changing every single day.
Then your spiritual assurance changes every single day. You wake up on a Tuesday in a terrible mood, maybe you had a fight with your spouse, and suddenly you start panicking, thinking, maybe I'm not really saved. I don't feel God today at all.
You become entirely trapped in this cycle of spiritual navel-gazing, just constantly analyzing your own emotions to see if you're okay.
Do I really love God enough? Do I feel healed yet? Did I cry during the worship set today?
That sounds absolutely exhausting.
It is exhausting. It's a treadmill you can never get off. The source argues that true biblical assurance comes from looking outward.
Not inward.
Never inward. Assurance comes from looking at a finished, objective, legal transaction. I know I am safe not because I magically feel safe every moment of the day, but because I know the objective debt has been fully paid.
It's like looking at a receipt.
That's a perfect way to put it. If you go to the store and buy a new TV, and you have the printed receipt in your hand, you don't have to walk out of the store trying to conjure up a feeling that you own the TV.
Right. I don't have to ask myself, do I feel like a TV owner today?
No,
Yeah.
you own it. It is a legal, verifiable fact. The transaction is complete. The judge has slammed the gavel. It's done.
Wow.
The source says the modern church has tragically traded the solid, unmovable rock of a legal verdict for the shifting, sinking sand of our own daily emotions.
That distinction right there between looking inward for assurance versus looking outward at the cross, that really seems to be the main thread tying this whole thing together.
It is. And this constant inward focus leads directly to what the source calls sentimentalism.
Sentimentalism, which they define as love divorced from truth.
Yes. And the result of that is a church filled with people who are, on a human level, very morally serious.
They want to be good people.
They desperately want to be good. They advocate for social justice. They want to be incredibly empathetic. They want to heal the world. But they're not theologically justified.
They are seeking all the fruits of the gospel without the forensic, legal root of the gospel.
Exactly. They are trying to build a massive, beautiful house, but they have completely removed the concrete foundation. Eventually, it's going to collapse.
And this brings us to part V, the conclusion, which honestly is the most surprising and provocative part of this entire source material for me.
It's a brilliant pivot.
Because we spent this whole time talking about how the church has systematically rejected the ideas of blood and wrath, mostly because it thinks the modern world is too evolved, too sophisticated, too uncomfortable with it.
Right. We think the secular world is beyond wrath.
But the source completely flips that assumption upside down.
It shatters it. The authors argue that while the church has been busy scrubbing all the blood and wrath out of its theology, the secular world hasn't abandoned wrath at all. In fact, it has fully embraced a terrifying blood-soaked reality of its own.
And we see this perfectly manifested in cancel culture.
Cancel culture.
The source explicitly calls cancel culture a bloodless atonement ritual.
Which is such a fascinating, piercing way to look at it.
It really is. So analyze this for us through that theological lens. How is canceling someone an atonement ritual?
Well, just think about the actual mechanics of a cancellation online. Someone, somewhere, commits a transgression.
A sin.
A secular sin. Maybe it's an offensive tweet from 10 years ago that resurfaces. Maybe they used a clumsy phrase in an interview. Maybe they just hold a political opinion that is suddenly deemed unacceptable. What happens next?
The mob descends. Instantly.
Instantly.
Yeah.
There is massive collective outrage. There is a frantic demand for immediate consequences. People want them fired from their job.
They want their book deals canceled.
They want them totally deplatformed, exiled from polite society.
So there's wrath.
There is immense, fiery, unyielding wrath.
It's almost puritanical.
It is entirely puritanical. Society still desperately demands purity. It still demands swift justice for breaking the moral law. It still deeply needs a scapegoat to cast out into the wilderness to cleanse the community.
So we haven't actually stopped being religious at all.
Not in the slightest. We are just as religious as a 17th century village. We've just changed the vocabulary of the religion. We still believe in sin. We just call it being problematic. We still firmly believe in excommunication. We just call it canceling.
But, and this is the terrifying part, there is a missing piece in the secular version of this ritual.
A massive missing piece. The
Wow.
secular world has the wrath, right? The angry mob on Twitter.
Yeah.
It definitely has the guilt, the public shame of the person being destroyed. But it has absolutely no sacrifice. It has no blood.
And without blood.
As the writer of Hebrews says, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins.
That is profound. If there is no payment to satisfy the mob, the debt just remains forever.
Exactly. The source calls this secular phenomenon infinite moralism without redemption.
Infinite moralism without redemption.
You can be canceled, but you can never, ever truly be restored. You are just permanently stained. You have to go away and hide.
There's no mechanism for grace.
None. There is no altar where the canceled person can go and say, the objective price has been paid for my mistake. The justice has been satisfied. I am clean and I can come back into the community.
Because there's no substitute to take the blow. They just have to take the blow themselves forever.
Precisely. So the authors argue that the modern world isn't actually uncomfortable with violence or retribution at all.
No, we love it. We use it constantly on our ideological enemies. We binge watch true crime and revenge movies. We love seeing the bad guys get what they deserve.
Exactly. What we are actually uncomfortable with is divine justice. We hate the idea of God defining the terms of right and wrong, and we hate having to rely on God's singular solution. We desperately want to be the judges ourselves.
We want to hold the gavel.
We want to hold the gavel, but when we hold it, we have no mercy.
And God's solution, the one the church is supposedly offering, is the cross.
Yes. The source concludes that the only actual hope for a culture that is literally eating itself alive with endless cancellation and vengeance is to unapologetically return to the old bloodstained theology.
To offer objective forgiveness for objective guilt.
Yes. Because you cannot therapy your way out of a cancellation. If the mob is outside your door, you can't just tweet, hey guys, I'm going on a journey of healing.
The mob doesn't care if you're healing.
The mob does not care about your self-actualization. They want blood. They want a payment.
And the historical gospel steps into that exact moment and says, here is the blood.
Yes. The gospel says, look at the cross. The blood has already been spilled. The cosmic justice has been perfectly satisfied. The debt is zero. The mob can drop their stones and go home.
Wow.
It really is the ultimate mic drop on modern anxiety.
It is a massive amount to process.
Yeah.
We have gone from the therapist's couch up to the cosmic courtroom of the universe, back to dusty 17th century books, and then right into the middle of a vicious modern Twitter storm.
It's quite a journey, but it really highlights the stakes of what we're talking about here. This isn't just dusty, abstract theology for guys sitting in ivory towers debating angels on a pinhead.
No.
It is intensely practical. It is fundamentally about how we deal with the absolute core problem of being human. The inescapable fact that we are not what we should be, we break the rules, we hurt people, and deep down we know it.
So as we wrap this up, what is the ultimate takeaway here? For the listener who is, driving to work right now or doing the dishes, listening to this deep dive.
I think the real so what all this material is this. The modern bloodless gospel, the therapeutic version, it definitely feels nicer at
It
first.
does.
It feels much more inclusive. It fits a lot better with our comfortable, safe coffee shop aesthetic. But the source makes a compelling argument that in the end, it is actually incredibly cruel.
Deeply cruel.
Because it completely removes the only actual cure for our deepest, most terrifying problem, which is objective guilt. If you take away the literal blood of the cross to spare people's feelings, you completely take away the absolute certainty of their forgiveness.
Like the cancer doctor.
Exactly like the doctor. You leave the patient lying on the couch, dying of the legal tumor of sin, while constantly patting their hand and telling them they look absolutely great.
And you leave all of us trapped inside our own heads, just endlessly trying to feel our way to salvation.
Navel-gazing our way into despair.
Man, it leaves me with this final, really provocative thought to chew on. And I want you, listening right now, to think about this as you go about your day.
Lay it on them.
If we intentionally remove the blood from the Christian story just to make it a little more palatable to the modern world, do we actually end up stripping the world of the only mechanism that can possibly stop this endless, brutal cycle of human cancellation and vengeance?
That is the question.
Does a nice God, a completely safe, therapeutic God, without any wrath or demand for justice, does that kind of God actually just leave us trapped in our own shame forever?
I think the authors of our source material would say yes. Yes, it does.
Well, thank you for diving so incredibly deep with us today. It's been heavy, but man, it's been necessary. We'll see you all next time.